This will probably be close to an hour and a half. C1 is, as I'm sure you know, quite a beast to tackle. We'll be giving a sort of overview of the paper, zoning in on some areas that we haven't spoken about in other webinars, and giving you some ideas, hopefully, to help prepare your students online. My name's George Heritage. I work in the Assessment Services Department in the Madrid office, and this... We can't hear you, Victoria. We can't hear you. No microphone.
Sorry, no.
That's okay. And this?
Hello, my name is Victoria, and I work with George in the Assessment Services Department in the Madrid office.
Welcome back to those of you who have been to our webinars before. If not, I hope you enjoy yourselves. We are all working from home, as I'm sure you know, so there might be some connection problems. The picture might not be ideal. If you have any problems, click on the reconnect button. If that doesn't work, close the window and re-enter using the same way that you entered the first time. That normally sorts it out. Okay. We also have our colleague David Bradshaw in the chat box, who might say hello at some point. He'll be trying to keep up and give you useful links, etc. We will give you access to a certificate at the end of the session, and we'll be giving you access to various documents. Well, one document full of useful links at the end of the session, so anything we mention will be on there. And there is at least one. Is there only one, Victoria, or two? There's one handout, so that should pop up in the files section at the bottom when we need that. Okay. Right. Should we start?
Mm-hmm.
So, Victoria, what are we doing?
We're going to be looking at tasks in C1 Advanced and also see how they can reflect real-life skills.
Try and give you some ideas to develop your students' skills.
Mm-hmm. And we will finish giving some hopefully practical ideas to use in class.
I think one advantage with C1, we would hope, is, you know, at that level, they're probably much better prepared and more able to take more control of their own learning. So we'll direct you towards some resources. I think C1 students, in theory, need less support than our younger students. I know that's not always the case. It depends very much on your students. But also, as we go through, if you want to put any tools or platforms or resources that you've been using, please let us all know. We'd like it to be, you know, a forum as much as possible as we move through. So, a quick overview of C1. You're probably all aware that there was a revision in, when was it, Victoria? 2015, 2016, of First Advanced and Proficiency. Advanced was shifted a little bit, I think, to make sure that it was appropriate not only for, you know, general C1 English, but also for higher education and workplace purposes. So what skills are needed in higher education, Victoria, and how are these reflected in C1, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that if students want to go to university, they will need to be able to write essays and be able to develop an argument and also structure their ideas. Yeah.
From a listening point of view, be able to understand, take notes at lectures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from a speaking point of view, deliver presentations, also take part in discussions, but also be able to interact and develop social skills to enjoy life outside the classroom.
Yeah. They need to be ready and confident when taking exams, we would hope, at higher education. So hopefully preparing for something like C1 Advanced also helps on that line. And also, as I said, I think becoming much more autonomous learners, developing good, strong independent study skills, good time management. And I think playing into that as well, the last one, Victoria.
Yeah, being able to do research and understand textbooks.
Yeah. Well-organized research, sort of self-driven research, I think. I mean, in the workplace, obviously, reading, writing emails, which is becoming more and more appropriate. We haven't got on here deal with online meetings, have we?
No.
No, not yet. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
This has to be any addition.
Oh, yeah, I think we might have to add that soon. Listening, Victoria?
Yeah, being able to understand, also being able to take notes at the same time in meetings, well, teleconferences.
Oh, we have got it on there. We have got teleconferences on there. Excellent.
And also other events and conferences.
And speaking wise, again, delivering presentations, professional presentations, taking part in discussions, presenting arguments, negotiating decisions, alongside much higher level conversations, social skills for networking, interacting with customers, colleagues. And your favorite, Victoria, reading?
Yeah, being able to read and also write reports, again, developing arguments, structuring ideas, and also understand when and how to use both formal and informal language as appropriate. I think this difference between formal and informal register becomes really important at C1.
Yeah, definitely. I remember we did the presentation we did on B1. A lot of teachers saying, "Oh, this has to be written in a formal style," and students they're not expected to have the language really to differentiate well between informal and formal language. It comes in at B2. Again, it's not the sort of be all and end all, but once we're up at C1, students should have a good control of register and a good understanding of the differences between formal and informal structures, vocabulary, in their writing, in their speaking. How's your formal language, Victoria?
More or less okay, I suppose.
More or less okay.
I hope.
Okay, so there are some of the skills that we feel are reflected in C1 Advanced, both academically and professionally. A quick overview of the paper. Reading and use of English is an hour and a half, and students are expected to be able to understand complex arguments, read quickly enough to follow an academic course.
Writing, again, an hour and a half, and students should be able to communicate complex ideas effectively in writing reports, essays, and other text types.
Listening can follow discussion and argument with only an occasional need for clarification. And
speaking in 15 minutes, they need to be able to show that they can have extended conversations and discuss abstract topics with good fluency and range of language.
Complex, I think, really comes to the fore in C1. If any of you came to any of our previous webinars, there's one on writing criteria. And there we really looked at the difference between sort of B2 and C1. B2, I think students are expected to be able to successfully communicate straightforward ideas. C1 is successfully communicate complex ideas. And as we've said before, I think we're getting more and more younger students, sort of 14, 15-year-olds taking C1. And their language is great, their speaking is fine, their listening is fine, but sometimes they fall down on the writing. And it's this ability to just to construct and conceive complex ideas before even being able to communicate them. I think this really does begin to separate the stronger from the weaker students at this level. So we'll start off with writing. This is the format we've followed on our previous webinars. It's not the order of the papers, but we're going to do it anyway. So in the chat box, very quickly, what helps students improve their writing? We've done this several times for different levels, and we normally get the same answers. So a special prize to anybody who comes up with a different answer. What's everyone going to say? Everyone's typing reading. Yep, everyone says reading. Scaffolding, reading. Writing,
Practice.
brainstorming, lovely.
Feedback.
Excellent.
Planning, George.
Planning, excellent. I think every other time we've asked this question, teachers have always said reading first. And yes, at any level, but especially, I think, once you're up at C1, having the only way to really have a good understanding and appreciation for different text types and how language is used successfully in different areas is obviously reading, which we know is tricky. Trying to motivate our students to read is almost as difficult as motivating them to write sometimes. Okay, lovely, thank you. We broke it down into these 3 areas. Victoria?
Yeah, preparation, planning, and reviewing. But we are going to give you more details now.
Exactly, and we're talking from a beginning to end. If we're approaching a new writing task with students, these are the 3 main areas we think are important to focus on. We're talking from in class to the completed piece of writing. So preparation to start off with.
Yeah, motivation. I think it is vital at any level. So maybe using digital resources, as we are going to see today, can make the activities more appealing. Also trying to personalize materials.
Yeah, and again, I think big advantage of C1 is you can use most genuine material. You can use authentic material, which in a way takes a bit of a load off your shoulders as teachers, and it does make it more interesting. There's always going to be something authentic on something that the students are interested in, whereas as we know at lower levels it's sometimes difficult to find engaging authentic material that they can successfully understand. Conventions, somebody said in the chat box a couple of times, being aware of what is expected. I think definitely conventions of different types of writing. It's important that the students are aware of this, and a good way to help them do this is to give them, Victoria,
plenty of good examples of good writing examples.
Exactly,
for
models.
them to reflect and identify what works well.
Yeah, and as with all other levels, scaffolding. Obviously, I think scaffolding will take a slightly different shape at C1 than it will for our much lower learners, but we will look at how one approach to scaffolding for our C1 learners momentarily. Planning.
Yeah, considering the target reader here, as we've seen, it's going to be very important because we need to make a lot of decisions based on that, and also to take into account the task requirements, the type of text, the content points that we need to include.
Organization of ideas within the planning, and the purpose, and these all to some extent overlap. I mean, the purpose, the target reader, the task requirements all sort of overlap a little bit, but all of these are very important to bear in mind before starting a piece of C1 writing. And again, I think planning becomes even more important the higher the level of the writing, and there is more of a focus on organization, register, communicative achievement. Not more of a focus, but it becomes more detailed, I think, at higher levels. So planning will always help them. I always used to tell my students use 10% of their exam time on planning and on
reviewing.
Yes,
so in this case, checking the range that is going to be wider at C1. So we hope to find a complex grammar and vocabulary used appropriately.
Yeah. Try to avoid repetition. At this level, there shouldn't really be much repetition. Obviously, sometimes a word has to be repeated, but we would hope that our C1 students do now have a broad enough vocabulary to use a variety of synonyms, etc., where necessary. Again, reviewing with the task requirements in mind, making sure that they have answered the questions, they've done what is asked of them. The writing criteria, we'll have a look at the C1 writing criteria later, but content, which is one of the areas of criteria for all of the levels, has the same descriptors at every level. And if they do what is asked of them, they should get full marks on content. It's an easy way to get 25% of your mark, sorted. And it's a real shame when you see great pieces of writing, but they've missed one of the content points. They haven't quite done what's asked of them, and they don't do well in the exam situation. And lastly, of course, when reviewing,
not to make mistakes, slips.
Probably more slips this level.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you're writing 200 words, Always good to take some time after a nice calm approach to the planning. Take a few minutes at the end to make sure you review what you have read, what you have written. Sorry. Right. Other things to help students improve their writing, Victoria? Some of these have popped up in the chat box.
Yeah, teacher feedback, of course, is always useful, and students always appreciate it at any level. Peer and self-assessment. Maybe here, as students are hopefully more independent, they have already developed the ability to self-assess and also assess their classmates. And the learning diary, maybe it works better at higher levels. George,
yeah, it could do. I mean, it depends how you how you interpret learning diary. Well, in our previous presentations with much lower levels, sort of keeping a track of things that they're not so good at and things that they improve. I think higher levels as well. I mean, I always had a very long, detailed vocab book, at least. Didn't you, Victoria?
Yeah. I still keep it.
Yeah. Do you? Oh, well, yeah. I keep some somewhere. I don't know. Do high-level students use vocab books now? They probably have a vocab file.
Yeah,
somewhere.
probably.
I don't know. Peer assessment. I think in this new online situation that we find ourselves in, a couple of people mentioned this in the chat box, reviewing each other's work, reading each other's work. I think they should have the maturity by this point to engage in that maturely. And I think it's a really nice way to make sure that they're familiar with the assessment criteria that we use to help look at other people's work and also to then help inform their self-assessment also. Motivation, Victoria. There are lots of different ways to motivate our students. Any ideas in the chat box? Motivating or lead-in activities to writing that you would do in class? A learning diary, as I said, it could be just a record, an ongoing record of things they have learned, errors they used to make that they have now corrected, and we'll look very briefly at write and improve later, which I think can sort of double up as an online learning diary. A portfolio of writing. It's another nice way to keep a record of everything and be able to see how students have progressed across those pieces of writing. Lovely encouragement, good feedback, group and pair work. Videos, yeah, I mean now, when we were at school, we didn't have YouTube, did we, Victoria? Well, maybe you did. But there's so much material online available for free that you can use as a motivation, setting up a discussion in class, etc., or in your online classes, videos and texts. Yeah, I mean, I think especially at this level again, integrating skills is much easier and very useful. So you could take 3 photos as we have here from the speaking test. And just use that as a nice way to start brainstorming, generating ideas and discussion.
You can get your students also to start trying to think about the topic in how it would affect their own lives and see how they can relate to it.
Personalizing it brings it closer and makes it more relevant. I think we are aware that some of our exam questions aren't exactly the most exciting, but you can practice the task types very easily and try and personalize them as far as possible whilst you're practicing and training and helping your students. Yeah, flashcards. Yeah, I mean, even at this level, no problem at all. So scaffolding, we've looked at scaffolding at much lower levels, very much breaking the writing process down into chunks and building up to a piece of writing. And I think the same can be said for C1. Obviously, it's always going to be a more complex piece of writing. Again, if you watch our webinar on the write criteria, we look at how you can use writing criteria to inform how you create tasks, and also obviously how you mark tasks. But in that, again, we look at each of the criteria and how you can locate each of the criteria within a task, and then break it down. At C1, we've taken an essay. Is it, Victoria?
It is, yeah.
An essay task. This is a C1 essay task, literally just pulled into 4 pieces. How could we use this in class, Victoria?
Yeah, maybe we can show the students like each content box like in different stages, so that they can process it more easily, and they can also, with the previous activity, hopefully some of the ideas that are going to be mentioned here have already been mentioned. So this is also going to help them with vocabulary and also with reasons, maybe to justify their opinions and the opinions included here.
Yeah. So just breaking questions down, I think, and you can turn these into, so point 3, you can start a class discussion based on those opinions. Point 2, you can start a class discussion based on that. Give them just the proposition for homework. Make notes on this. Don't create an essay. Make notes on this. Breaking tasks down into their constituent parts and working on those so that they can eventually come together, as opposed to, you have this class of C1 students, write an essay. Here it is. Here's the question. Go. It can be a bit overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, and there is quite a lot of information to take in order to be able to do the task. So yeah,
exactly. So I think breaking it down as far as possible, and if you make it a routine thing, automating that, or helping the students internalize and automatize that process will help them when they find themselves in the exam situation. Okay, we would love to go into more detail, but as we said, there's a lot to cover. We will be running a series, probably looking at each paper for C1 and C2 to try and cover those, because we've had some requests for C2. And I think we might hereafter do reading and use of English, advanced and proficiency, writing, advanced and proficiency. So keep your eyes out for that, and we will go into things in a lot more detail. We just don't have time today. Another approach, Victoria, very easy and very useful, I think.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to give students a sample answer for them to analyze and reflect on the ideas covered, the content, and but also like positive aspects, and also, why not, things to improve. So this is just an example for them with some questions for them to reflect.
Yeah, and you can easily take a sample answer. If you look in the C1 Advanced Handbook for Teachers, which David might be able to put up in the chat box, you have various sample answers for different text types with examiners' comments. We'll look at a couple of these in a minute, but it's a really nice way to show them what typical students of their level are producing. And you can get a lot of different activities out them as well. Using model text, which we'll look at in a second, is also great. But a model text is a model. I mean, it's a perfect text. It won't have errors in it. It won't necessarily be written using language typical of learners at the level. So I think sample answers are a great resource, and you can easily do something like this. Take a few words out, give them the words in a box, make it a gap fill, practice a bit of their use of English, get them thinking about this text structure. What have we taken out here? These are mainly linking, aren't they?
Linking,
I would imagine. Really nice way to practice linking words. And then once they've done that, they can give them the criteria and ask them to mark them. There's a lot of different activities you can get very easily and quickly out of using sample answers.
Mhm.
Okay.
George, before we move on, this is in our handout. I don't know if you want to share it or want
Do
to
we
wait
want to
a bit.
do we want to share it now? Don't we want them to do something before we share it, don't we?
Okay.
Yeah, we have an activity, so we'll wait.
Okay.
Um,
But just
we'll-
for them to know that this will be available
yeah,
in the
we
handout.
will be giving you this in the handout. Okay. So as I said, using models, ideal, perfect, faultless texts definitely helps them understand different writing conventions, and helps them understand the different language functions that are required of them. What language functions do learners need to demonstrate at C1? Anyone? What sort of language functions do learners need to demonstrate in their writing at C1? So for those of you who teach IELTS, it's be band 7.5, 8. Cohesion and coherence. There's Sarah comparing, suggesting, evaluating, arguing, phrases, grammar and vocab, persuasion, yes, persuading, influencing, interpreting, lovely, evaluating, yes. Do we have these on the next slide, Victoria?
We do.
We do. We summarize them thus. So there's quite a lot of functions that they are going to have to be able to express, and they're going to have to know the kind of language, the kind of typical structures that we use to express these language functions. So description, describing, evaluating, hypothesizing, persuading. Victoria, you do the right-hand side.
Yeah, expressing opinion, but also comparing, being able to give advice, and of course justify opinions and judge priorities.
Some of these language functions are much more typical of some task types than others, but there could be overlap between all of them. So the task types that they are expected to be, that they will be asked to produce in the exam, I think the email is obligatory. No, the essay is obligatory. We've already looked at the essay. And then they have a choice between email, letter, proposal, report, and review. We'll look more closely, I think, at review in the B2 session that we do. I think review is always nice for your stronger candidates. We've looked at an article, we looked at articles at B1, and we looked at essays at B2. We did a session on writing at B2 and above, and we really focused on the essay. So today we're going to have a very quick look at proposals and reports. As I said, your stronger students have a very flexible, competent command of their language, a very nice range of grammar and vocab, and they're comfortable writing more freely. I would direct towards the review. However, I would say the two more formulaic approaches or task types that you can get in C1 Advanced are the proposal and the report. Tell us about these, Victoria.
Well, here we have two examples of tasks that can be found in the writing paper, and I think a nice activity would be to see how they are different and also what the similarities are between these two types of texts, because they are new. They are introduced at C1. The report is also for B2, the standard version, but here they need to be able to know really what a proposal and a report are.
Because if you look at a proposal and a report, sort of a quick overview, they probably look quite similar in terms of their layout, etc. But the differences between them. Similarities, they both can have sections with subtitles, which again definitely helps at the planning stage, and it helps break down the piece of writing. Again, if you show a student an essay or a review, it's a big lump of text and it can be quite overwhelming. So they can be easily broken up into sections with titles. They can be formal or informal. This would depend on the rubric. I think. Obviously, if it's within a professional setting or an academic setting, within the rubric that's set up by the task type, that should inform that. And Victoria?
They both have an introductory paragraph giving the purpose or the aim of the text, but there are differences. The report closes with recommendation, whereas the proposal closes with suggestions. Also, like the function, the purpose that they serve is different.
Yeah. Niall or Neil, sorry if I've mispronounced that. That is the main difference, I would say. I mean, they're both quite descriptive and evaluative pieces of writing. You've got to think that a proposal is always going to be looking towards something in the future. So from a language basis, that will have an effect on the whole, an overall effect on the language that is used. Whereas a report is looking at something as it is and then making recommendations. Proposal, probably for a more to be used in a context much more in the future. If you see what I mean. Is that clear?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. Recommendations versus suggestions. Okay. So let's have a quick...
going to, sorry, George, but we are going to look at this in more detail later with sample answers. So hopefully this will be clear.
Exactly. We're going to move on to the assessment now. Sorry, we've only had a quick look at those, but as I said, we will come back with a webinar focused entirely on writing at C1 and C2, so we can go into some things in more detail. Okay. So assessment and feedback, both very important. Obviously assessment, kind of working for the company that we do, but feedback, and I think a lot of people said earlier that feedback definitely helps learners improve their writing. And I think at C1 level, your feedback can be more detailed, perhaps more granular. And so different approaches to this, especially considering our current situation, Victoria?
Yeah, we're going to look at some tools that you can use. I think that maybe giving feedback and also maybe assessing can be, when it comes to the assessment of writing, can be easier maybe when we are teaching online, because there are different tools that you can use. The first one that we're going to look at is a Word document. And as you can see here, what I've done is to write comments, highlighting where problems can be found. And what I've done is create like a code that hopefully my students will share with me, so they will be able to understand, and I'm trying to point them in the direction and place the responsibility on them, like for them to reflect and improve the writing.
Yeah, we did another webinar called Getting Feedback Right, which you can find on our YouTube channel, which goes into lots of different types of writing feedback in more detail. But we do not talk about Screencast-O-Matic. Expand, no. Victoria.
Yes, we may want to just simply make the changes and track them so that students can see them, but we may need to explain why we're making those changes or why we are making suggestions. And with these tools, Screencast, you can record your voice while you are making the changes. So apart from having the visual input of the changes, they can also listen to you and hopefully understand better how they can improve their piece of writing.
And you're integrating skills there as well, aren't you? I mean, you're providing them with a listening task. It's listening, reading, and writing, and all in one. And I've spoken to lots of teachers say it's much quicker than getting out your red or your green or your yellow or your purple pen. I've heard good things from a lot of teachers about using this. If none of you have seen this before, or have you got more to say, Victoria?
Sorry, I was just going to mention Google Docs, like any tools to share documents, because the disadvantage of using a Word document is that you have to then send it by email. But if you want to encourage peer assessment, maybe you want to use Google Docs, because the, students can see changes in real time, and also the changes are in different color depending on who has made them.
And also a nice platform to use for collaborative writing. We've looked at Padlet in previous webinars. We've heard lots of interesting ways to use Padlet from different teachers. But Google Docs, yeah, very easy, very quick. And I think even at C1, getting students to write collaboratively is a very interesting exercise, because they will be writing more and they'll be writing much more complex things. But it will also add in a level, once they've all contributed to their piece of writing, a sort of editorial level, which I think in terms of academic skills, etc., is very important. The idea of drafting, redrafting, editing work. I know we've spoken about this before, and apologies if you have heard us, but it's a great skill throughout academia, I think. And we're only going to speak very briefly about this now, because we've spoken a lot about it before, but Write and Improve is an incredible resource for you as teachers. It's one of the best resources we have, I think. Explain how it works very quickly, Victoria.
You can register. It is free, and if you register and you are a student, you have a lot of tasks that you can choose from with different levels, and then you can type in your answers and get instant feedback in terms of a CFR level, also in terms of content, and at word and phrase and sentence level. If you are a teacher, you can also register, and you will be able to create your own workbooks for students to do at home. And you will be able to share with them the workbooks for so that it's easier for them. And now, George, maybe you want to talk about Class View very briefly?
Yep, Class View. Most of the functionality on Write and Improve is free. Someone in the chat box has just said it isn't, but it is. There's an extra additional bits like Exam Zone with very specific IELTS practice questions and B2 first. That previously was a premium edition, but if you sign up now, you get a 2-month free trial, so at least use it for 2 months. Most of the great functionality in it is free. There's also a great new edition called Class View, which is at least free for 2 months if you sign up. And in Class View, you get a detailed view of all of the pieces of writing that each of your students are doing, each version that they've done, the corrections they've made, how they have improved. It's a wonderful tool. So please explore it if you haven't already. We speak a lot more about that in our other writing webinars, if you'd like more information on getting feedback right and the right criteria. So, assessment. Ooh, I'm going to give you all access to a handout now. And activity 1, which is the first few pages, we looked at previously. Then I think on page 4, is it page 4, Victoria?
Then
no, page
we have
7.
we have another activity for the proposal and the report, and on page 7 they have the assessment criteria.
Page 7, we have the advanced C1 advanced writing criteria. Okay, you can see it's broken into content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. And we love speaking about this, but we did a whole webinar on it, so we won't spend too much time now. Please refer to that if you need more clarity. But we're going to have a look at a couple of sample answers and see how the criteria is applied by examiners. So here is a report, a fairly typical report at C1. I'll leave that on screen for a bit. You don't want to hear me. Yes, the certificates will be made available at the end of the webinar. So you can see, as we said before, with report suggestions, the last 2 sentences in your report, you should evaluate the program, suggest changes. You need to evaluate, explain that evaluation, and then make suggestions based on your evaluation. So here is a sample answer. What are we going to look at, Victoria? What should we look at? Which criterion should we look at? Because C1 tasks are a little bit big to do on screen with so many teachers.
Yeah, maybe we can focus on communicative achievement.
All right, lovely. Have a quick read of this and decide what would you give this candidate for communicative achievement. Okay, so communicative achievement, we're thinking about using the conventions of the task, holding the target reader's attention, and communicating ideas. A band 3 on our criteria for C1 is a C1. Okay, so all of our criteria overlap. So a band 5 in C1 is the same as a band 3 in B2. And likewise, a band 1 in C1 is a band 3 in B2. So 3 is C1. 3, 4 is C1 writing. So in the chat box, I'll stop talking so you can read a little bit. What would you give this student for communicative achievement? Arif, yes, evaluation can be subjective, but that is why we use as clear as possible published criteria, and all of our examiners undergo very stringent certification and then standardization to ensure that they are all marking similarly.
Also, George, I think that you always suggest quoting from the assessment criteria, and I think this is really useful because it helps you be more objective.
It does, and if you as far as you can quote the criteria, give examples. Quote the criteria, give examples, and again, it helps internalize the criteria in the students' minds. Also got 3s, 4s. Oh, we're all doing very well. Oh, very nice. I think this is on your handout, so don't cheat, but you can look at it in more detail later. Here are the examiner's comments. So this was a good piece of writing. Language is C1. Language is a 3. Organization 4. Content 5. Again, as I said, this is the easiest criterion to get good marks on. Make sure you do what is asked of you in the question and you'll get good marks. Communicative achievement here, they get a 4. So they use the conventions of report writing to communicate ideas effectively. Good use of title, subheadings, each section focused on one topic. There's a range of language of evaluation, comparison and suggestion, and they fulfill all the communicative purposes of the task. And lastly, the target reader's attention is held. Both straightforward and more complex ideas are expressed using appropriate tone and register. So as I said before, communicative achievement, it covers quite a lot. Traditionally, I think a lot of people think communicative achievement, register. Is it written like an essay? Yes. But once you get up to this level, it's this ability to, I'll just stop sharing and share the handout again for those who can't get it. It's this ability to communicate ideas successfully within the conventions of the task. So there's quite a lot going on here. And that is sometimes, I feel, where students fall down. Somebody said in the chat box that sample answers that they look at in class, sometimes the examiners give higher marks in the sample answers than maybe you see reflected. Obviously, you have to take into account that students are, in exam conditions, and anything can happen in an exam. Yeah. Nerves sometimes get the better of us. But yeah, here is a nice solid above C1. So this would probably get a B overall. Do you not think, Victoria? 4s. If we know that a 5 is up into C2, I'd say this candidate would probably get a middle-ish B for this piece of writing. Okay. Right, and we'll just have a quick look at a proposal so we can highlight the differences again. Plans to demolish an old building, blah, blah, blah. You decide to write a proposal explaining why you think it should be preserved, suggesting what can be done, and saying how the benefit how the building can benefit the local people. So these are suggestions with the effects of that thereafter. So you're making recommendations and explaining why those recommendations would or are valid. Again, probably a bit more scope for using conditionals, etc., in a proposal. There's not a huge difference between reports and proposals, but make sure your students are aware of the differences in terms of what they're being asked to do. So here's an example of this. What should we look at here, Victoria?
I don't know. Language? Do you want to look at language? Organization?
Language is quite a lot to look at in one go.
Okay.
I think let's maybe organization. Let's have a look at organization. I can spot a couple of little language wobbles.
You can't help it, George.
I know. Interesting. Someone said the wrong register. So cumulative achievement, maybe not so good. If we're looking just at organization, it's also important to bear in mind that organization is not just, are there paragraphs? Yes, paragraphs are very important, but they have to fall logically. And then organization, we're also thinking about internal cohesion and coherence. So even within sentences or within a paragraph, is there a sensible use or a good use of discourse markers, pronouns, etc., to thus avoid repetition? Internal referencing, a lot of that will fall into organization, especially at this level. So we'll move on. We don't want to go over time. Victoria?
Yeah.
Organization,
Three.
skip to 3.
Okay. The text is well organized and coherent. Good use of subheadings, and each section is focused on a separate aspect of the question. Within the paragraphs, there is a variety of cohesive devices, and more complex organizational patterns are used for emphasizing important points. For its characteristics, 17th century building, and for its importance in the past. It is still studied. Blah, blah, blah.
One key thing to notice here in communicative achievement, as I said before, they get a 2 on communicative achievement. They mention a letter, the conventions are evident, but the focus of this proposal tends to be on the past rather than on the future. So there should be more emphasis, because it is proposing something that will happen. There should be more emphasis on how the building could make a difference to the town and the community in the future if it were preserved and modernized. So that quite nicely highlights what we were saying about the differences between a proposal and a report. Okay. Right, we've got to move on. Time is disappearing. So reading and use of English, everyone's favorite paper. Especially Victoria's. She loves it.
I like it, yeah.
Grammar. How many parts are there, Victoria? 5 parts? 4 parts? Ooh,
for reading and use of English, for both of them?
No, I think for both of them, 5 parts. No? In total? Maybe more. What helps students develop their reading skills? And I think also at this level, a lot of the opportunities students have to produce and not actively learn, but subconsciously develop their use of English, especially, comes from reading a lot. But reading-wise, Victoria?
Yeah, prediction. Well, this is for reading and for everything, really. Prediction is a key aspect to develop. From headings, in this case, pictures, also background information. Also develop their knowledge of text types and the text structure that goes with it.
Helping develop sub-skills of reading, especially, and obviously vocab. As you said, thank you for clarifying, everyone. That was a little test, and you all passed. There are 5 for reading and 3 for use of English. All of these are very important for our stronger learners. I think this cycle, everything feeds into, each stage feeds into the other. And I think especially at C1, we really start focusing, well, we have a B2, but C1 being able to differentiate between skimming, scanning, expeditious reading, being faced with the text, having an idea almost instantaneously of its text structure, the kind of reading that they're going to need to use for this part is very important. So back to the reading and use of English question, parts 1 and 2. The types of language that are tested in these parts. Victoria, favorites like collocations?
Collocations, conjunctions, idioms, auxiliary verbs, phrasal verbs.
And more. Preposition, prepositional phrases, complementation, pronouns, obviously in quite a developed way, linking expressions, and really at C1, shades of meaning begin to become more apparent, definitely in the more reading-focused areas, but also in the more gritty, the open close and multiple choice close. Part 1, as you all know, is actually tested as reading. Why is that, Victoria?
Because it has a more lexical focus. So we are going to find more examples of collocation, semantic precision, linking words, complementation, idioms, phrasal verbs. So more emphasis on the lexical aspect.
Yeah, I mean, obviously an appreciation and understanding of the grammar that is presented is necessary, but we're testing much more lexical items rather than lexicogrammatical items. Open close, as you all know, I mean, they're quite difficult to write, to be honest, because there can only be one answer, but it's focusing much more on the grammatical. So auxiliaries, pronouns, articles, conjunctions, and prepositions. Part 3, this comes in at B2. I think at C1 it's can be quite challenging. Do you not think, Victoria?
Yes, yeah, it is. At B2 it's the start of it, but then here it becomes more complex, of course.
And how did you help your students to approach this?
Well, I always encourage them to write down when they saw like different forms of the words, and also to reflect when they found them as well, but also with games. I think like the fun component here was excellent for them to remember.
Very important in this because I think, at this level they should automatically be figuring out, what part of speech is it, which will help them. If they have a good knowledge of their vocabulary, that will help them anyway. But so many times you've got students writing the correct part of speech, but the meaning is wrong because they haven't read the sentence otherwise.
Yes.
Like children must not be left supervised during meal times.
Yeah.
Correct part of speech, I'm moving on. Going back and checking that it makes sense afterwards.
Yeah,
is essential.
They really and I think they need to. What you said, they need to read before, so that they get a sense of what the text is about, and then they need to check it, of course, afterwards.
Exactly. And yes, Renat, that word family, all new vocab. I think obviously as teachers, whenever teaching a piece of vocab comes up, we are hopefully all aware of the different ways it needs to be presented and explained and understood by the students. But again, hopefully at this level at C1, students should be doing this on their own. So Victoria has taken this word, which I'm not going to pronounce, but what different aspects need to be borne in mind when presenting a piece of vocabulary like this?
Yeah, sometimes we think that we know a word, but knowing a word has a lot of you need to tick a lot of boxes to say that you know a word.
So record or record, I mean, we've got to think about a huge amount of things. All of its forms. How do you build related words? Are there any grammatical or grammar restrictions?
How is it used? When is it appropriate? How does it relate to other words or collocations here?
Pronunciation, spelling.
Yeah.
And a really useful resource for helping students with this is the English Vocab Profile, which was an ongoing project between Cambridge Assessment English and Cambridge University Press for the last 20 years, a huge corpus project. How is this useful, Victoria?
Well, it is useful because you can see how the words are used at different levels, because this is based on students' production. We need to remember that.
Yeah.
And also, apart from that, as you can see on the next slide, you have, apart from the pronunciation, the definition, examples of how to use it, and also learners' examples. So I think it is a great learning tool.
Lovely. A game that you played, which is very easily done online, Victoria?
You can give students or pairs or teams a suffix. You show them on a card or whatever online, and then they have to write words with that suffix. And then they write the part of the word that comes before the suffix. So the other students guess what the correct suffix is.
Lovely.
So it can be a warm-up activity or to finish the class in a bit more fun way.
So moving on to reading, we'll speed up a little bit now. We're running a little short of time. As we said before, different reading skills that learners need at C1. I think a much bigger focus, like I said, on skimming reading, scanning for specific information. There are tasks in the exam that are specifically designed to, for example, the text is far too long for the students to have time to read the whole text, read the question, read the whole text. They need to really know what is being asked of them at each in each stage of the exam. Approaches to practicing this in class, Victoria?
Yeah, well, we're going to see how like training students so that they are able to work on the different sub skills and decide when to do it, and also giving them the opportunity to identify different text types and where the information can be found. But
Yeah.
I think we are going to look at this in more detail on the next slides.
We did a webinar on receptive skills at A2 and above, and towards the end of that, there were some useful online, I think called Hack My Study. Is it hackmystudy.com? Victoria?
Yeah.
We're using some software which can help identify inessential words. That was a really nice. That was a really nice thing. So you can put any text into there, and it will remove the non-essential words, which I think helps speed up students' reading. Putting texts in columns. It sounds very simple, but that's what we do in newspapers, etc., which makes skimming a lot easier. So presenting text in different formats, which is very easy to do online, can help develop these reading sub skills. They will need to be able to skim a text to decide whether it's interesting or relevant, understand a text in detail to learn more about a topic, but also again locate where the detail is quickly in longer texts. Reading in class, online or not, Victoria?
Yeah. We need to remember that we don't usually read in isolation. So it is we need to remember that when we are scaffolding the reading process, providing students with pre-reading activities that can be speaking activities or vocabulary tasks. Also, as you said, different techniques to increase their speed, their reading speed. And also giving them the opportunity to find and read longer and more complex texts.
Yeah.
So there is a progression.
And so motivation, collaborative work. I don't know if many of you are using Zoom. I think breakout rooms are a wonderful way to I think in some ways it has made a lot of our classroom activity easier. Having pre-reading discussions, skills integration, obviously, as we said throughout this.
Yeah, using texts not only for reading, but also to extract structures, vocabulary, and for reflection activities.
Yeah. I've just given you access to the certificate for people who need to leave now. This is a really nice idea which could be easily achieved online. You think, Victoria?
Yeah. I think that we can use Padlet for this. We can find 3 news stories, cut them up into paragraph chunks, and place each of them on a different table or on a different Padlet.
Students work in groups or pairs, depending on the size of your class. Each group is assigned a news desk and a story. And then they have to reorder, put the story back together, which is using higher order thinking skills, and prepare a summary of their story to feed back to the class. Another really nice, slightly more developed version of this would be taking 3 news stories, well, the same story from 3 very different papers. This may be a bit more for C2, but taking it from, let's say, a broadsheet, like the Times or the Guardian or the Telegraph, and more of an online paper, maybe like the Eye, and a tabloid like the Sun, for example. Split things up, and the first stage is working together and deciding which text comes from which paper, which I think very useful for use of English. Register formal versus more informal language. It's a really nice. I mean, I used to get a week out of that activity. It's very useful. So moving on to listening quickly. We're running out of time. Apologies. There's so much to talk about with C1. Quickly, the certificate is available in the box at the bottom now, where you've got the handouts. Okay. So what makes listening in another language difficult? Very quickly in the chat box. What makes listening in another language difficult? Rhythm. Okay, interesting, Olga. Yeah, intonation. The language itself, speed, accent, pace, different sound, speed, delivery. Trying to translate. Yeah, we'd hope maybe at C1 they'll be trying to translate less, but difficult vocab. Yeah, obviously that will happen. Bit of a reduction. Lovely. Lots of different things. What do we come up with, Victoria?
Yeah, I think everything has been mentioned. So, well, maybe concentration and attention wasn't mentioned, but it plays a very important part when it comes to listening. Also, the level of interest, processing time, the complexity of the content, background knowledge. Hopefully, this is not relevant in our tasks.
No, it shouldn't be. We try to design our tasks so background knowledge is not necessary. Understanding of context, especially much higher levels, not knowing the context can have quite a detrimental effect on your ability to understand what's going on. The amount of visual support, especially in lead-in tasks, within our exam papers as well, some tasks do still have visual support even at C1, I think, and identifying the speaker's purpose. Helps again from a productive point of view. When we're writing or speaking, we have to bear our purpose in mind, but identifying it from a receptive point of view can also help understanding a lot. Pronunciation features which make listening difficult. It's difficult from their expectations, or they have not come across it before. All of the accents in our exams are native accents, but especially at C1 there will be more of a variety. So they should be familiar with various accents from the US, Canada, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, maybe South Africa as well. Speed, as you all mentioned, intonation, and this becomes, again, more important, I think, definitely at C1. The effect that intonation can have on meaning. Identifying and understanding stress, which again feeds into the intonation, I think. Yeah,
also use of fillers, self-correction and repetition can be also maybe confusing if students are not prepared for that.
Yeah, and repetition by the speaker, which we all naturally self-correct and repeat a lot. So helping students with listening skills. I think we're going to divide this into helping them before listening, during listening, and more in general. I mean, obviously, how do you improve their listening? You get them to listen. Definitely helps. Before listening for the part 2, for example, Victoria, we're speaking before listening in an exam context.
Yeah, obviously always reading the text before, looking at what comes before and after the gap to decide on the part of a speech that they need try to make predictions, and then listen, and then of course check their answers and check that they make sense.
Yeah. Part 3, the multiple choice. This students are expected to listen to longer interviews, longer discussions, and we're focusing on attitudes, opinions. So
That's
it's not
also
necessarily concrete information that we're listening for anymore. It's
yeah.
much more nuanced than that.
Agreement, gist, feeling, purpose, function, and detail. Most of them, as we can see, are, as you said, George, quite abstract. So,
and I think one of the most useful things we can do here is build on their language, build on their vocabulary, degrees of certainty, adjectives and adverbs, discourse markers, a good understanding and recognition of reporting verbs, all part of the language that they should need to know. This is a nice exercise of yours, Victoria.
Yeah, just to prepare them for what they are going to listen, try to discuss the difference in meaning between the adjectives and see the different nuances, and then integrate this activity with speaking and get them to talk about a time when they felt in such a way. Because if they can relate to it, I think it will be easier for them to remember.
Yeah. Right. It's helping them whilst they're listening. I think using the tape script, it's not a bad thing to do at all. The tape script can be used very effectively before a listening task, after a listening task, definitely, but sometimes, during the listening as well, especially with more complex speech, helping them identify the ideas that they're trying to listen to or identify. Listening again, you all know that the text is heard twice in our exams, but there is no reason why it should not be played more in class. Helping them pick out key information, maybe pausing the recording around where the answers are on a second or a third listening.
Yeah.
And generally making sure that they are exposed to a variety of texts and accents, especially accents. Making sure that they're not surprised once they end up in an exam situation. Teach them the various pronunciation features that they will be listening to. And inference, this does come in more at C1. There's maybe a little flash of it at B2, but understanding meaning from what isn't said. Is that clear, Victoria?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I know some English can be really horrible, especially with intonation and stress. I know sometimes we say one thing and mean completely the opposite. Like, that's interesting. Normally means the opposite. As much practice at this as possible. Right. Speaking. Last paper. Everyone's favorite. What would you like to say, Victoria, about this?
Well, that we can develop speaking skills while we are trying to develop other skills, integrating them. But I think that at C1, students, they always find challenges when speaking. But at C1, there are challenges which are quite specific at higher levels.
Yeah. What challenges do your students face speaking at this level? Somebody said shyness. Yeah, we've done our best. It's only an hour and a half, so sorry it's been a bit quick. But as I said, we will focus in on the other papers in a lot more detail in further webinars. Vocabulary, willingness to communicate, B2 habits, interesting. Fluency, expansion of ideas, lack of vocab, lack of lack of ideas. Yeah, a lot of things are being tested at this level all at once in a mere, 14 minutes? 12 to 14 minutes, being concise,
15.
linking ideas, natural words. What did you come up with? What did we come up with, Victoria?
Yeah, vocabulary, appropriate vocabulary, complex grammar, being able to cope with unfamiliar topics, more abstract ones as well. The ability to negotiate in a natural way and not dominating the conversation. Also, being able to use a range of cohesive devices and discourse markers.
Whilst organizing their ideas, it is a lot to do
Yeah.
all at once.
And intonation. I think that here plays a very important part.
Yeah, it does
And
become much more apparent in the pronunciation descriptors.
yeah, and nerves that are always tricky.
Unfamiliar topics, being able to carry on talking, I think
Yeah.
is important in an exam. But again, you know, you want to carry on talking correctly and at level. Yeah, the marking criteria. I think the marking criteria is at the end of the handout that we sent you. Isn't that the case, Victoria?
I think so, yeah.
I think it is.
Let me check. It's
Yeah,
on page 17.
We'll look at a little sample of an exam in a minute. But teaching online.
Yeah, there are some tools that you can use. Flipgrid, for example, you can set a speaking task and get students to reply with a video. This can work at all levels, but I think it's a nice one for C1. Then also Voice Spice, you go to the website, students go to the website, they make the recording, they save it, and they can save the link, so it can be more practical. Then English Central, I found this quite interesting. It's mainly for intonation, so you watch a video, you learn the script, you learn the words, and then you can record yourself copying the pronunciation and intonation and get a grade.
Nice.
Yeah. And then BBC, of course, with little short videos to improve pronunciation.
Lovely. If we're focusing on the exam, the part 2, so the structure of the C1 exam, there's a sort of interview phase in the part 1, and then the part 2, it's very similar to the B2 structure. Part 2 is the long term, so they're given 3 pictures.
Yeah, and 2 questions.
They have to choose. I think they choose 2 of the pictures, don't they, Victoria?
Perhaps. Yeah.
And talk about that on their own. Then it moves on to a collaborative task where they have to discuss something together. And then part 4 follows on from the collaborative task of further questions directed either at each of the candidates individually or for the 2 of them to discuss, depending on the examiner and how much time each of the students has had in the previous task. But part 2, activities, Victoria?
Yeah, get them to practice for talking for a long time, as you said, or for extended period. So trying to get the most of the pictures, also be able to organize their thoughts and ideas, compare, speculate. So how can we do this? Try to elicit ideas, elicit vocabulary and other useful language so that they are ready for that. Having class discussions. Start with maybe 1 picture, 1 question, and expand on that. And also peer assessment. I think it's a nice way to work on this if you have a large group.
Lovely. Speculation. Speculating about photos, so if they really run out of things to talk about. And also they should have the language at this level to start doing this, using modal verbs, suggestion, etc. Part 3, the collaborative task. We'll have a look at this in a second. Again, as I said before, I think the advantage of C1 is you really can use most authentic material available, and TED is a great resource. What do you think, Victoria?
It is. It has a lot of topics, videos with different durations, so really you can do a lot with it.
So what have you done here?
Yeah, I have combined like kind of part two in which students have to compare the pictures, hopefully to get them to start thinking about the topic and come up with useful language. Then this listening activity to give them more ideas, and then hopefully they will be able to use them to fill in this mind map and do the task.
And thereafter, they practice the part three.
Hmm.
And then once they've done that,
Yeah, they need to think about possible questions that they could get in part four. So then they can compare the different questions they came up with and practice part four questions.
and then reflect on their performance. And I mean,
Yeah.
if they recorded this, even better, and they can reflect on it using the speaking criteria. As I was saying with writing, I think making sure that students are aware of the criteria on how they're being marked will help them no end. Another one, writing a controversial statement on the board.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on your context.
Yes.
Maybe
Dividing your
not
students
too
into groups.
controversial.
No, not too controversial. Yeah. Safe. Still safe.
Safe but controversial. A minute for each group to plan a response to the statement, then nominate a speaker. Each speaker has a minute to respond. You can have a really nice, and I think might probably be easier to manage something like this online, having sort of online debates, especially if you as teachers have control of the microphone. And then at the end, a sort of open question time, challenge the speaker, and again, reflect on performance. And if you can record, and if your students are happy to record, you can then get a lot of listening practice out of it, applying the criteria to what has happened.
Yeah, and one of the participants was asking about what we mean by reflect. So maybe thinking about aspects that have been done well and also giving ideas for improvement.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have it, if you can record it, give it to them for homework. Write down positive aspects, negative, or positive things that went well, things that could have gone better. Is a constructive way to put that. And give them the criteria. Give them one person to focus on, and focus on the different criteria throughout the activity. So this is peer assessment. I mean, self-assessment as well if they're recording themselves. The benefits of self and peer assessment, they become more and more aware of their strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully learn how to improve, what they need to do to improve. Yes, Victoria?
Yeah, trying to make work, make it feel normal, set a routine, and obviously try to motivate your students to do it, and offer assessment criteria that they can understand and incorporate that into your classroom, and just use the success criteria or the assessment criteria.
Success criteria is nice. It's what I said earlier. Things that went well and things that could have been improved.
Yeah.
Make it as positive as possible. As
possible.
As possible. And they can use that criteria. Yeah, self-assessment, peer assessment, and then identifying areas where the class could improve, where they can improve. Very useful. So you could also do this. There are quite a few C1 advanced speaking tests available online. We're going to watch part 3 now, which is the collaborative task. We'd like you to look at the criteria on page 17 of the handouts and look at interactive communication. Okay. Make sure your students are familiar with and they understand the criteria. Watch the video with them. Ask them to probably choose one candidate. Think about positive aspects and aspects that could be improved. You then share the opinion as a whole class and give each of them feedback about what they've done well, what they could have done better. Shall we watch it, Victoria? Here is the criteria. We'd like you to focus for this on interactive communication, okay, on the right-hand side, and choose one of the 2 candidates and give them a grade from 0 to 5. Okay, we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Now I'd like you to talk about something together for about 2 minutes. Here are some things that people often have to make decisions about and a question for you to discuss. First, you have some time to look at the task. Now talk to each other about what people might have to consider when making these decisions.
Okay, so let's talk about choosing a university first. I think people have to think about, well, first the students have to think about what they like, of course, when they choose a university, and students and parents have to think about money, because in some countries universities is very expensive, like in England here.
And I think you have also to choose the right university for like where you can study the subject you really want to, and also that the university with the subject is the best university with from all the universities with the subject.
Like the best results in an exam or something like that. And what about starting a family? Again, there is a financial criteria to consider, I think. And well, when you start a family, you need to talk maybe about children.
You have also to think about if you're ready already to build a family, and if you have enough money and
where to settle, and you need to think about the jobs maybe, because I think that now most of the parents, I mean the two parents, are working, so they need to take that in consideration.
Right, we had some interesting feedback in the chat box there. We'll show you the examiner's comments now. For Raphael first, I think. We have language at the top, discourse management. Let's look at the interactive communication. He responds appropriately. He links his ideas to Maud's, adds to what she has to say about choosing university. He doesn't take the opportunity to contribute, letting Maud develop the discussion a little later when talking about jobs and language. He contributes more to discussion in the decision part of the task than in the first part. It takes a little while to get going. And he adds on when they both seem to have said everything they could. So, I mean, he does okay. He does okay. One thing which is very difficult not to do, which a lot of you have started doing, is comparing them, which our examiners never do. Each candidate is assessed alongside the criteria, not alongside the other candidate. I do think she kept things moving a little bit more, I think. She responded appropriately, linking her ideas to what Raphael said. And although she consistently contributes to the discussion, at times she could have tried to involve him more actively. Sometimes she takes over a little bit, which you can see reflected in him not contributing as much. And she could have maybe added a little bit more in the decision part of the task in order to keep this going for the whole minute. This is available on our YouTube channel, and there are lots more examples of speaking tasks and examiners' comments. So please take advantage of that and show your students, show them what is expected of them and what happens in the exam. So finishing off now, Victoria.
Yep. Please visit our website, Supporting Every Teacher, because there you're going to find a lot of resources, and not only free teaching material, but also exam preparation and Supporting Every Teacher, our blog, Supporting Every Teacher, and where you can find also useful tools there for the current situation, and then you will always be have access to our free webinars.
If you click on free teaching resources, I think C1 there might be one or two, if not they're en route. our exam support team in Cambridge have put together a great series of lesson plans designed for online teaching. Okay, I know that A2 and B1, there's a lot there already. B2 as well, I think. C1's en route if it's not all there already. We might look at one of these in our B2 webinar in a bit more detail and talk you through one of them. They're all designed very much with online teaching in mind. And sorry we couldn't go into more detail in some areas. As I said, C1 is a massive exam to deal with in an hour and a half. I'm glad that we just about managed to do it in an hour and a half. Sorry we couldn't go into more detail, but as I said, we are planning a series on each skill for C1 and C2 to try and combine the two of them, and we'll look at what differentiates between C2 and C1. And yeah, thank you all very much for coming. Other resources, the new support guide for teachers, the support pack, Victoria?
Yeah, available for all levels, and also with lesson plans and exam preparation material. Everything is there. It's very easy to find the information there, and I really recommend it. Also with tips for teaching mixed ability classes, so a lot there for you to check.
I know there are a lot of questions about the certificates. Once you download the certificate and open it as a PDF, you can click on the name area and add your own name. Okay, that should work absolutely fine. So yeah, again, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Use Write and Improve. It's amazing. And here are various other links. I'm not sure when our next webinar is, maybe next week or the following week on B2. But as I said, we'll start breaking down and going skill by skill. I know we've got a series of webinars for young learners starting next week, so have a look out for those on the website. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you
very much. Do you have any questions for the last minute or so? If that doesn't work with the certificate, you can email the webinar email address, which you can find on the website, and we can sort it out. But I think the majority, it should work. If you open it as a PDF, you can then edit that. We will try and get it organized for mail merge for the next one. It's a little tricky. Thank you all. Thank you very much for coming. Again, yeah, this was a quick overview of C1. And we got a bit carried away with the writing. We often do get carried away with the writing. So keep your eyes out for our B2 sort of overview, and then for the paper specific ones, we'll combine C1 and C2. Yeah, and I think they will get a link to the replay, and our webinars are also available on YouTube. Yeah, for those who want to watch it again. Our previous ones are available on YouTube, all of them now, I think. And this will be on YouTube shortly. So keep your eyes out. Thank you all very much for coming. And we look forward to the next one where we can go into more detail on various papers. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. And thank you very much. We'll thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.